Let me say a couple words about IFPRI. IFPRI, just like Mr. Babadoon said, IFPRI is a global institution. We are based in Washington. We have about 500 staff right now. However, almost 40% of our staff are based in other locations rather than Washington. So here in West Africa, in East Africa, in Asia, like China, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and so on. And when I took over IFPRI about 2.5 years ago, we really tried to move our presence to the countries. And we truly believe that working with our partners, collaborators in the country, in the region, will be the most effective way to help them to improve their policy-making capacity for achieving food security, nutrition security. And my board, particularly Mr. Babadoon, was serving at IFPRI's board. And our board members from this region and from developing countries have been asking IFPRI to really move towards the region, to the country. And we heard your message. So that's why Osman and I immediately discussed our plan in West Africa and in Africa in general. So about 2 years ago, so Osman was tasked to set up a regional office here. Although Osman is a director for Africa, overall Africa. So he's in charge of all strategic directions, all strategic planning for IFPRI for the whole region. But we gave him a specific task, that is to set up a regional office here in Dakar for the whole West and Central Africa region. I'm glad to report to you that the office has been set up. The office is running so well, and we have senior researchers here from different parts of the world, not only from West Africa, but also from Europe, from many parts of the world, to work together to really engage our partners, policymakers, farmers' organizations, research think tanks. And it is my ambition or my hope that in the next 5 years, the policy recommendations for achieving food security, nutrition security in the region, in the country, should really come from the researchers from the region, from the country, not from researchers in Washington, from IFPRI, based in Washington, or from the World Bank or OECD based in Paris. So that is our ambition. And this is my experience from the region I come from, India, China, and Vietnam. But their successful transformation in agriculture were guided by the local capacity, by local policy making capability. So this is our ambition in the next 5 or maybe 10 years through the efforts of our regional programs here, our regional offices, and our country support strategy programs. Now, obviously more needs to be done, particularly in terms of knowledge sharing, in terms of networking with non-French speaking communities. I remember when I joined IFPRI 15 or 18 years ago, we only had maybe a couple of staff who can speak French. I think Osman is one of them. And our work in the Francophone countries was so limited, almost zero, except maybe Osman and a couple of others research. But today, we have really expanded our presence here. So our work in, let's say, in Burkina, our work in supporting Mali's transformation, Senegalese transformation, and more importantly, ECOWAS. So we play a critical role in providing information, knowledge, and support to ECOWAS in moving its economic transformation to use agriculture in that transformation. So this is a brief introduction. Thank you for coming. Now, for the last year or two, IFPRI launched an initiative to publish a global food policy report. And that report really tries to synthesize or comprehensively review what have happened in that particular year related to food policy developments. major food policy development in that particular year. And the report is targeted to non-technical people. So the busy people like you, like policymakers, the people from donor communities, practitioners, can easily review what have happened in that particular year with regard to food policy developments. And to provide you an outlook for the new year, that's for 2012 or 2013, what will be major food policy development in that particular year. And we launched this report in Washington in April. So we had about 100 people from Washington to listen to the review. And then in the meantime, we had so many people who listened through the internet, through live stream, webinar, all these modern technologies. So during the first week of the launch, we had like 6,000 downloads of that report. Now, I think this is not good enough. We achieved in the English community. What we need to do is to move that effort to Francophone community, and probably even to a Chinese community. So we translated that report into French. I think some of you have already have a copy. If you don't have a copy, you can try to ask for one when we complete this session. So it is our ambition to bring our knowledge products, our research results, and probably our networking to this country. So without further ado, I will very briefly review what are the major food policy developments in 2011 and what will be the outlook for 2012. I know it's already June, but many food policy developments in 2011 are still very much relevant. So for 2011, it was both a challenging year and also an exciting year. In terms of challenge, the food prices remained very high, remained volatile. So many poor people suffered from that. This is because of extreme weather events, and because of the continued biofuel expansion, because of continued financialization of food commodities, and because of the long-term neglect of agriculture sector. So all these factors have contributed continued higher and volatile food prices in 2011. And the Horn of Africa crisis continued, and we have seen some civil unrest because of the higher and volatile food prices. But there was some good news as well. The agriculture came back to the development agenda after so many years of neglect. Many countries begin to increase their investment in agriculture, in food production. And the donors have also increased their investment in agriculture. And the G20 in Paris, the first time, made a concrete declaration on how the G20 countries can work together with their partners, with non-G20 countries, to really calm down food price volatility. So let me try to give you some sort of snapshot on what were the major food policy developments in 2011. The World Economic Forum usually is held in the early in the year, usually towards the end of January. The World Economic Forum is a forum for politicians, global leaders, private sectors, thinkers, thought leaders, opinion leaders, to come together to debate global issues, the issue that affects the whole human being, how we can work together. So it's a non-governmental, structured event. Anybody can come, including some of the top leaders from different countries. For 2011, so it was probably the first time the global leaders, plus some of the large agribusiness firms or food firms, to commit themselves to resolve some of the food crisis issues, particularly price volatility. So the first time the private sector came together and they launched a vision. So vision for agriculture. So these are the big agribusiness firms like it's PepsiCo, Nestle, Unilever, Walmart. So all these are the private sector firms, but they came together to commit themselves to use the private sector engagement to make sure that their investment, their engagement will also help the poor people, hungry people, and to solve their food and nutrition security. So I was part of that, and I was so glad to observe that commitment from the private sector. In my own country, China, every year China would release an official document, so called #1 document. Every year they release a document to focus on agriculture. And for 2011, the highlight of that document is on agriculture. Agriculture, particularly use the investment in irrigation and water conservation. Because in 2010, the previous year, China experienced lots of droughts, lots of floods. And that really actually reduced food production in many parts of the region. That actually have contributed to the food price volatility at a global level. So the China realized that was a problem, so they committed to invest huge amount of money in agriculture. In fact, for the last 2 or 3 years, China probably accounts for more than 50% of the global increase in agricultural investment. And China was able to double their agricultural investment in a matter of 3 to 4 years. Then in February, IFPRI held a very big conference in New Delhi to link agriculture to health and nutrition. So agricultural production is very important to food security. Food production is very important. But don't forget, our final objective of producing more food is to make sure that people have access to nutritious food. So that conference brought more than 1,000 participants, including the Prime Minister of India, including many thought leaders from Africa, from here. So because of that event, we really put nutrition and health very high in the development community, and using agriculture as an instrument for achieving nutrition and health outcome. Then we know that there was an Africa-India Forum Summit sometimes in May, May 24th and 25th in Addis Ababa. But India, the following China, India has also committed to use their foreign aid or their trade to work with Africa and to explore certain possibilities or certain opportunities that both Africa and India can really tap. The opportunities to help food security in both continents. As a result, India committed to open trade. For example, India would import more agricultural products, particularly beans, pulses from this continent. They also promised to invest more in agriculture research in Africa. Then G20 in June, which I also participated. So it's the first time the ministers of agriculture came together and made the commitment to work together as a partnership, as a network, to really calm down the food price volatility. So some of the concrete commitments, including more investment in agriculture, refrain the biofuel production. We know that the biofuel production has really depleted, and lots of grain stocks. It's in the U.S. Just for your information, the United States alone is using 140 million metric tons of maize or corn for biofuel production. Could you imagine 140 million metric tons? And obviously the European Union is also producing biodiesel from oil seeds. So the G20 countries have committed to refrain the biofuel production. And the G20 also committed to set up the grain reserves. So during the crisis, how the countries can really access to certain regional or global reserves to calm down or to help the poorest of poor during the crisis. Well, clearly, more needs to be done particularly with regard to global food price volatility. So this year, G20 countries continue to push for some of the sort of commitments they have made in Paris. So moving from commitments, moving from declarations to actual actions. So this was the centerpiece of the debate this year during G20 Mexico. Now let me try to synthesize some of the issues around some of the major food policy developments. The first is food prices. We know that 2011 food prices remain very high. In fact, continue to rise. February 2012 observed historical high in terms of global food price index. FAO began to monitor food price index starting from 1990. So February 2012 was historic high, the highest, although lately that price has come down. And many policies in 2011, and probably even until now, exacerbated food price volatility. The trade barriers. So many countries imposed trade export bans. So they ban the exports. So keep the food in their own country to make sure that the domestic prices are low. 2011, you see the continued trade bans. For example, during the Horn of Africa crisis, Tanzania banned exports to Somalia, to Kenya. So as a result, the food prices, maize prices in Kenya, in Somalia, went up further, so almost double. And the subsidies. It is still the case that many countries, particularly Europe, the US, and some of the emerging economies like China and India and Brazil, increased their subsidies. So on the one hand, the subsidized inputs, prices, output prices help to enhance food production. On the other hand, it really eliminated an opportunity for smallholders in South Asia and Africa to use higher food prices as an opportunity to increase their production. So subsidies are bad. And they actually further worsened food price spikes. And subsidies are not limited to production side. In the consumption side, in the case of Egypt, particularly in the Middle East countries after Arab Spring, one immediate action for the countries to do is to provide more subsidies to food. The food prices will come down. But that policies are also very bad because everybody, whether it's poor or rich, will benefit from subsidies. And that subsidies will cause macro imbalances. The countries will experience financial deficit, or fiscal deficit. So what we need is more targeted subsidies and use that subsidies for productive investment to increase agriculture production. And some of the good news, emerging economies increased their investment in agriculture. I have mentioned that China has increased its investment. Brazil has also increased its investment in agriculture, particularly in agricultural research. India followed the same path, although it's more subsidies than investment. And the G20 proposed actions, the market information systems, one I have not mentioned. So the G20 proposed to improve the market information so everybody has timely, accurate information about the prices, stocks, production, consumption, so everybody can be prepared to plan their production, their consumption. And the first time the ASEAN countries, this is the Association of Southeast Asian Countries, came together to set up a grain reserves, rice reserves. 1 million tons has been committed by different countries, China, Japan, South Korea, and certain Southeast Asian countries like Thailand and Vietnam. And that commitment really helped to avoid further price spikes of rice. So for the last 2 years, we have seen quite a stable rice prices, partly because of these grain reserves or rice reserves. Then the disasters, natural disasters. 2011 was a historical year that we have seen so many disasters. Japan's nuclear power plants disasters, droughts, floods in China, landslides in Brazil, and more importantly, the Horn of Africa drought. 15 million people suffered from hunger. More than 30,000 children died because of the Horn of Africa crisis. So how can we really improve regions' resilience? By investing in education, economic growth, better access to markets, and using certain social protection and linking social protection to productive investment. We call it productive social safety nets to really help the poor access to food in short run, and in the meantime build their long-term productivity enhancement capacity. And looking ahead, this region, Sahel region, is facing risk of food crisis. So if we don't move to urgent actions, we will repeat the same mistake as we have experienced in the Horn of Africa. The climate change and agriculture. 2011 was a good year for the climate change and agriculture community. Just before the year started in Cancun, there was a climate change negotiation. So agriculture was very prominent in that discussion. The first time agriculture was very prominent in the climate change discussion. And towards the end of the year, December 2012, the Durban Conference on climate change is truly a milestone. The ministers of agriculture from this continent, from Africa, came together and really committed and really joint effort to say that if there is no agriculture in the negotiation, there will be no climate change negotiation. So agriculture was very prominent in the Durban climate change negotiation. And as a result, there will be a task force to continue the negotiation. And that task force met in Bonn in May or June. In May, just before the Rio Plus 20 event. So they really try to form some common position to work together. So my only regret is this region needs capacity, needs commitment to work together to increase their voice in the climate change negotiation. Right now, what I heard in all this negotiation are the voices from America, voices from OECD countries, voices from China, from India, from Brazil, not from Africa. Part of the reason is lack of capacity in presenting a case how Africa will suffer from climate change. Africa is already suffering from that. And it's not your problem. It's because of industrialization from OECD countries. Then biofuels and environment and food. We know that the biofuels production will increase global food prices. We know that increased food prices will affect a lot of poor people. So not only poor consumers, but also poor producers as well. We know that biofuel production do not help to solve the environmental problems, do not help to reduce the carbon dioxide emission. But there are some interests in many countries to promote biofuel production. As the people who are working for food security, for poor, hungry people, and we've got to present a case that biofuel is not the solution to environmental problems, to food, to energy problems, but it will hurt the poor people. And agriculture, nutrition, and health. In many parts of the world, particularly in South Asia, we have seen rapid economic growth, 8% growth in India for the last 5 to 10 years. Even agriculture is growing pretty fast, 3% per year, sometimes 4%, although slowed down recently. But the malnutrition rate, hunger rate remain very high. So there is this connection, a dislink between growth and improvement in nutrition. So why is that? So this is a serious problem in Asia. Our 2020 conference in New Delhi discussed about this issue, but we got to move to action. But the problem challenge goes beyond South Asia. Even in this continent, we have seen some dislink a double burden of malnutrition. On the one hand, not people are still undernourished or malnourished. Not only lack of calorie, but also lack of micronutrients. So many children, young girls are anemic. They do not have adequate micronutrients in their diet. On the other hand, because of the rapid urbanization and the increased size of the middle class in this continent, we have also seen increased rates of overweight and obesity. So double burden. So undernourishment and overnutrition occurs at the same time. And agriculture can play a very large role in making that link much stronger, much effective, and much more efficient. Land degradation. For the last 5 or 6 decades, productivity has been increasing. Food production has been increasing, particularly in some of the Green Revolution countries like India, China, Vietnam. But land has been degraded. Land degradation not only happens in dry area, so desertification, it's in northwest part of China or in Sahel region. Land degradation also happens in some of the fertile irrigated land. This is actually more serious. So 25% of productivity is lost because of the degradation in irrigated area. So certain high quality of land has been degraded. So during the lunch today with Osman, he told me that in Senegal, many parts of the country's land has been degraded. The soil nutrients has been depleted. And this is just the case in Senegal, but many countries are facing exactly the same problem. So the last September during the UN General Assembly, there was a side event to really call attention to reverse the land degradation. I'm glad that the Rio Plus 20 held just about a week ago put this high in the agenda. So zero degradation, zero land degradation. How we are going to move to action is another issue. This is a general issue for the Rio Plus 20. Now the new players include emerging economies, Brazil, China, India. New players include the private sector. New players include some of the new donors, like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Emerging economies, India, China, Brazil. So they play a huge role, not only in terms of the current financial crisis. So when I met with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, she said that, well, right now we really have to look for financial resources from India, China, Brazil. So that's where you have the money. Germany, the OECD countries right now, they are in crisis. They have more debt than actually reserves. But I think this emerging economies role goes beyond financial crisis, going beyond helping a financial crisis. Their role in food security is more important. Probably they have the comparative advantage of doing that. First, they have been able to use their investment, their policy, to feed their own population, although in the case of India, more needs to be done. So their own experience. Second, they also increase their engagement in Africa, in South Asia, in agriculture areas, food production, technology transfers, and knowledge sharing. So this is some of the areas the emerging economies can play a critical role. I think under Osman and our director for Asian region's leadership, we are going to launch a big effort to really bring these emerging economies and African countries to work together to go south-south learning through knowledge sharing, information sharing, capacity building. And the private sector, I already mentioned, the private sector, obviously they wanted to make money. But I also see some good trend. The private sector wants to do something good. The Unilever, a company based in the Netherlands, the CEO, Paul Polman, from his speech, I can tell his heart is with the poor, with hungry people. and he wants to transform his company, Unilever company, to provide income opportunities for smallholders, provide nutritious food for hungry people, provide certain opportunities to improve natural resource management, so save water, save energy, and save land. So private sector is not our enemy anymore. So they could be our friends, they could be our allies. The philanthropic organization, like the Bill Gates Foundation, and that foundation has really increased its effort in development, in agriculture development in particular. 5 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, its investment in agriculture is almost zero. Today, the foundation has become one of the largest donors, bigger than many regional banks, or probably close to the World Bank, in supporting agricultural research, in supporting agricultural development, in supporting food, nutrition, security in many countries. So we got to work with them, and this is happening right now. Regional and country development, Osman will elaborate more on West Africa, or probably the overall Africa and West Africa in particular. Some of the highlights, Arab awakening. So Arab Spring, partly is because of high and volatile food prices. This Tunisia vendor came to the street to protest because job employment opportunities are very limited. Inflation is high, partly pushed by food prices. So that's why, to some extent, these higher food prices triggered Arab Spring. Some of the positive news from this region, that is Canada, under the leadership of African Union, IFPRI, under the leadership of Osman Balian, we provided technical support to move CAADP implementation from the conceptual framework, from original sort of commitment to country-level implementation. So almost 20 countries have signed the so-called CAADP compacts. So private sector, public sector, Ministry of Finance, agriculture came together to commit themselves to use agriculture in supporting general development. Great progress in the last 6 or 7 years. And for India, India has introduced one of the largest National Food Security Act in history. So the government has committed a large amount of resources to make sure that everybody in the country has access to affordable food. Subsidized rice consumption, wheat consumption, very cheap, sometimes even free. Well, this is obviously debatable whether this is the best way to spend money, whether they should spend more money in improving productivity instead of subsidizing poor and hungry people. But definitely, we can see the commitment from the country. If you have the French version of our annual report, we also report various tools and indicators. So the tools the practitioners can really use for their own analysis. So some of the tools, AgriDAP, Osman has held a conference or some sort of consultation here last Friday or Saturday. So really try to work with Africans to build their capacity and then put agriculture in a general economic framework. So it's called AgriDAP, agriculture. Osman probably will introduce that in detail. Working with African research to build their capacity. So this is part of the effort to make sure that in the future, the policy recommendations on food security will come from Africans based in this continent. Food security portal, so we have a portal where you can go to access to information about prices, stocks, consumption, latest developments in food policy. Harvest choice portal, so we have various portal or web-based, internet-based portals where you can go to access to all this information. I think more important are some of the indicators, statistical indicators. So at the end of the report, you will see certain indicators to measure how different countries really supported their agriculture. So agriculture spending as a percentage of their agriculture GDP. Or how the countries have supported their agriculture research. So agriculture research spending as a percentage of agriculture GDP. And the food policy capacity. So that can really help us to make sure who have been doing better in terms of building their food policy capacity. Who needs more help? And the global hunger index, where you can see which countries are hungry, the level of hunger, whether it's alarming, extremely alarming, or severe, serious. You really put your national leaders in the hot spots. So over time, we track, we monitor all this progress, and we challenge our leaders. Have you made any progress in terms of your commitments to agriculture research, in terms of cutting hunger and poverty, in terms of increasing agricultural productivity? Now, obviously for 2012, half of the year is already gone. G20, Rio Plus 20, B20, G8 have already finished. We had a great hope in the beginning of the year. So my reflection on these events is the non-governmental institutions, the private sector, the think tanks, even the farmers, youth, have really engaged themselves. So this is really a positive development. We have never seen this before. I have also seen that people's thinking are beginning to change. So, to change how we can work together as a community, the whole world as a community. So these are some positive developments. But the challenge is the governments. The governments have not been able to make clear commitments. The governments have not been able to really make sure that their commitments will be moved to actions, to make sure that they are accountable to what the commitments they have made. So I'm a bit disappointed with the Rio Plus 20, G20, that the governments have not made clear commitments, clear accountability, so they will take. And for 2012, I have seen another positive trend. That is, different sectors have begun to work together. Water, food, land, health. So instead of isolated sector by sector, now we have seen different communities, different academic communities, different development communities come together to tackle certain problems using integrated approach. So this has been a very good development. So these are the highlights of the food policy development in 2011 and outlook for 2012. So for 2012, some of the emerging issues will continue to come during the second half of the year, particularly the oil price remain volatile, and certain weather-related events will continue to come. So the Sahel regions and North Korea, and financial crisis. So will continue to hit us, will continue to challenge us. So all these uncertainties will continue to bother us. So opportunities are also there. The development communities, the research communities, the donor communities, and some of the governments have really committed to use agriculture for broader development. And my own institution, it's called CGIR, the International Agriculture Research System, is also under reform to really try to bring the research results to actual development. So we are quite positive on that trend. Okay, thank you very much.